The battle had ended in fire. The skies above the frontier world burned as pieces of ships fell like falling stars. Among those fragments was a silver vessel that had once carried the hope of an empire. Inside it was Princess Alira of the Corin, heir to a throne that stretched across star systems. The blast that tore through her ship had destroyed not only metal and engines but also her own body. When the wreck came down through the thin atmosphere, Alira survived only because the escape chamber had shielded her from the worst of the impact. When she opened her eyes, she felt nothing below her waist. Her arms trembled as she tried to pull herself free from the shattered pod. She dragged herself through sparks and smoke, the proud lines of her face marked with soot. Her people had always spoken of the royal family as untouchable, as figures blessed by fate. But here she was crawling through broken steel with legs that no longer answered her commands. Her guards found her first. For a brief moment she thought they had come to carry her away, but their faces were filled with fear and shame. One of them whispered that the princess could not walk. Another muttered that she would only slow them down. Then, before her words could leave her mouth, they turned and fled into the storm. Alira's hand shook as she reached after them, but no one came back. The daughter of an empire was left alone on a world she did not know, her voice swallowed by the roar of distant fires. For days she remained near the crash site. The outpost where she landed was small, a remote colony not even worth defending in most wars. The air was dry and thin, the ground hard with red stone, her body weakened without proper treatment. Food was brought by strangers from the settlement, but they looked at her with fear, unsure whether helping her would bring punishment from the empires that fought among the stars. She began to believe that her life was ending here, not in battle, not in honor, but in silence. Then he arrived. Thomas was a human medic who had chosen to serve in this lonely frontier station after years of war service. He had seen too much suffering, too many bodies broken and discarded. His hands were steady, but his heart carried the weight of memories that would not fade. Unlike soldiers who fought for victory, Thomas fought to keep people alive, and this small colony had given him purpose again. When he first heard of the strange, injured alien, he expected another case where nothing could be done. Yet when he entered the chamber and saw Alira, he did not see only a lost princess. He saw a patient. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale with exhaustion, her eyes filled with fire though her body lay still. "You will not waste your time," she said, in a voice that carried both command and despair. "My legs are gone. Leave me to the fate my people have chosen." Tomas shook his head. "If you are breathing, you are not beyond help. I will not abandon you." She tried to protest, but his hands were already working. He checked her pulse, her wounds, the damage along her spine. His tools were limited, far less advanced than what the great empires used, yet he refused to let that stop him. He cleaned her wounds, eased her pain, and gave her the promise that he would not walk away. Alira closed her eyes. She wanted to believe his words, yet she had been raised in courts where promises were only shadows. She had seen her guards run. She had seen loyalty vanish in the face of fear. But this lone human did not bow or ask for reward. He simply worked. Days turned into weeks. Thomas built a small shelter around her to shield her from the dry winds. He spoke to her as he worked, telling her stories of Earth. He described oceans so vast they seemed endless, and forests so old that even empires would appear young beside them. Alira listened at first in silence, but slowly her curiosity overcame her pride. She asked about human medicine, about how a people without great empires had learned to survive among giants. Thomas told her that humans were fragile, but that was what made them strong. Because they could be hurt so easily, they had learned to adapt, to invent, to heal. Where others gave up, humans searched for another way. One night, as the wind howled outside the shelter, Thomas placed a small device on the table. It was little more than a frame of metal with wires that shimmered faintly. "This is the beginning," he said. Alira frowned. "Of what?" "Of your legs," he answered simply. She stared at him in disbelief. The healers of her empire had declared her case hopeless. Even their advanced science could not restore her mobility. Yet this human, working with scraps and colony tools, dared to say he would build what her people could not. "You are either a fool or a dreamer," she said softly. "Maybe both," Thomas replied with a faint smile. "But I would rather be a fool who tries than a wise man who walks away." His words struck her more deeply than she expected. For the first time since the explosion, Something stirred in her chest that was not bitterness or despair. It was not hope yet, but it was close. She turned her face away so he would not see the shine in her eyes. From that day forward, the silence between them changed. Alira began to speak more freely. She asked him about his people, about their history and their wars. She learned that humans were often underestimated, called weak by those who measured strength only in weapons or numbers. Yet they survived every trial not by being the strongest, but by refusing to stop moving forward. At night, when the stars spread across the sky, she would gaze upward and wonder if her empire still believed her dead. She thought of the throne halls where her voice once echoed and the betrayal of those who had left her behind. But now another image grew in her mind, the human medic, bent over his tools, his brow furrowed in focus, his hands steady as he built piece by piece a future no one else believed possible. And so, on a world forgotten by empires, a broken princess and a stubborn human began a story neither of them had expected. She had fallen like a star cast from the heavens, but perhaps with his help she might rise again. The morning sun rose weakly over the red horizon of the frontier world. Its light fell across the small shelter where Tomas worked, a space cluttered with metal scraps, wires, and tools gathered from every corner of the colony. The air smelled of heated steel and burning circuits. The sound of his hands striking against metal echoed like a rhythm of determination. Alira watched him from her bed. She sat upright with her back against the wall, her long dark hair falling over her shoulders. Though her legs remained lifeless, her eyes followed every movement with sharp focus. She wanted to understand why this human wasted so much energy on her. "You know this is impossible," she said, her tone cool. Thomas did not look up from the small joint he was soldering. "If it were impossible, I would not be trying." "Your tools are crude," she argued. "Your science is primitive compared to my people. Even our healers, with all their knowledge, declared me finished." "Maybe they gave up too easily," Thomas answered. His voice carried no anger, only calm certainty. "I don't care what they said. I only care about what I can do with my own hands." Alira fell silent. She wanted to dismiss him, to tell him that his stubbornness was foolish, but something in his steady voice made her hold her words. For years she had been surrounded by nobles who spoke in polished phrases, yet never meant what they said. Thomas was different. His words were plain, but they carried weight. For several days Tomas worked while Alira observed. At first she thought of him as only a craftsman, bending and shaping parts. But the longer she watched, the more she realized there was an artistry to what he did. He tested the balance of each piece, adjusted the pressure of every connection, and spoke to himself in low murmurs as if the machine were alive and he had to listen carefully to its needs. In the evenings, when his hands grew tired, Thomas would sit across from her and share food. The meals were simple: dry bread, fruits from the colony gardens, and sometimes cooked meat from the local hunters. Alira ate slowly, her pride still heavy, but she began to ask questions. "Why did you leave your wars?" she asked one night as the stars stretched across the sky outside. Tomas looked at the horizon before answering. "Because I saw too many people broken. I wanted to heal, not just patch wounds for soldiers who would be sent back into battles. Out here, far from the fleets, I can actually give life back instead of watching it fade." "You speak like a man who carries heavy weight," she observed. "I do," he admitted. "But that weight reminds me why I must not stop. Every life I save lightens it, even if only a little." Alira studied him carefully. His face was not noble or striking, yet there was something about the way he spoke, as if every word came from a place of honesty. She was not used to that. Among her people, truth was rare. As the days passed, Thomas began testing the first frame of the artificial legs. He asked Alira to allow him to measure her muscles and nerves. She resisted at first, finding the thought of a human touching her body undignified, but eventually she allowed it. He worked with gentle precision, explaining each step so she would not feel powerless. "The connection points must link with your nerves," he explained, showing her a small plate lined with delicate filaments. "It will not restore what is gone, but it will allow your mind to guide the machine. It will feel strange at first, maybe even painful, but with practice you can learn to move again." Alira looked at the plate with suspicion. "And if it fails, then I will build another one," Thomas replied firmly. "I will keep building until it works." She almost laughed at his determination. "You truly believe you can defy fate?" "No," Thomas said. "I believe I can defy despair." That night, long after he had fallen asleep at his work table, Alira lay awake. She thought about the guards who had left her behind. She thought about the voices of her people declaring her useless without her legs. Then she remembered Thomas's words. He had not promised miracles, only effort without end. That was something she had never known before. When the first test came, Alira's heart pounded. Thomas helped her sit on a stool while he carefully attached the metal frame around her legs. The cold of the steel pressed against her skin and the faint hum of power whispered in the air. "Do not try to stand yet," Thomas instructed. "First, close your eyes and focus on moving your foot. Imagine the movement, send the signal from your mind, and let the machine catch it." Alira closed her eyes. She had not felt her legs respond since the day of the explosion. At first there was nothing but emptiness. Then slowly a faint twitch ran through the frame. She gasped, her eyes opening wide. "It moved," she whispered. Thomas smiled. "Good, again." She tried once more, this time focusing harder. The frame gave a small jerk, clumsy but undeniable. Tears gathered in her eyes before she could stop them. She clenched her fists, furious at her own weakness, but Thomas only placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do not be ashamed," he said softly. "This is the first step." In the following days, training became their life. Alira learned to send signals through the strange connection, while Thomas adjusted the joints to respond more smoothly. At first, she could only make the legs shift slightly. Then, with practice, she managed to lift one foot from the ground for a brief moment. The effort left her exhausted but also alive in a way she had not felt since before the fall. Between training sessions, Thomas continued his endless work. He replaced weak parts, added stronger supports, and modified the neural links so they would better match her body. He never stopped, not even when his hands shook from fatigue. Alira began to notice small details about him. She saw how his eyes softened when he spoke of patients he had saved, and how his jaw tightened when he remembered those he had lost. She realized that his strength did not come from being unbroken, but from carrying scars with dignity. One evening, as Thomas adjusted the frame, Alira spoke quietly. "You could have left me like the others did. Why did you stay?" He paused, looking at her with steady eyes. "Because no one deserves to be left behind. Not you, not anyone." For the first time, Alira felt warmth spread through her chest. She looked away quickly, unwilling to let him see how deeply his words had struck. By the end of the second month, the frame was nearly complete. The legs gleamed faintly in the light of the workroom, shaped not with elegance but with purpose. They were not royal craft, but they were strong. Thomas placed them before her with quiet pride. "Soon you will walk again," he said. Alira stared at the creation, her heart torn between disbelief and longing. She wanted to deny it, to protect herself from disappointment, but she could not stop the spark of hope that had begun to grow inside her. As night fell and Thomas continued to work late into the hours, Alira whispered to herself, "Perhaps humans are not so weak after all." And for the first time since her fall, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could stand again. The day of truth arrived quietly. There was no ceremony, no audience, only the sound of Thomas arranging his tools and the steady beat of Alira's heart. She sat upright on the stool as he prepared the final version of the artificial legs. They were stronger now, forged from every piece of scrap he could gather, polished until the surface reflected light like water. Thin wires traced along the frame, pulsing with faint energy. Alira looked at them with narrowed eyes. The thought of standing again filled her with both excitement and fear. For months she had trained her mind to control the early prototypes, but those had been unstable, prone to sparks and sudden failures. This time Thomas promised the design was ready for real use. "Are you certain about this?" she asked, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "As certain as I can be," Thomas replied. "The frame is stable, the neural links are stronger, and your practice has prepared you. It will not be perfect at first, but you are ready." He knelt and gently secured the frame around her legs, the cold metal pressed against her skin, followed by the faint warmth of power flowing through the circuits. Alira closed her eyes, steadying her breathing. "Now," Thomas said softly, "send the signal." Alira focused. For a moment there was only silence within her body, the same emptiness she had known since the explosion. Then with a sharp pull of will, the machine responded. One leg shifted forward. The movement was clumsy but real. Her breath caught. She tried again, and the other leg moved slightly. Sparks flickered along the joints, but the frame held firm. "Good," Thomas encouraged. "Now rise." With his hand lightly on her arm for balance, Alira pressed her weight downward. The frame whirred, metal grinding softly as it bore her body upward. Slowly, painfully, she lifted from the stool. For the first time in months, she was no longer sitting. She was standing. A cry escaped her lips before she could stop it. Her eyes burned as she looked down at her body held by the shining frame. The ground felt solid beneath her, as if the planet itself welcomed her return. "You did it," Tomas said, his face bright with quiet pride. "No," Alira whispered, shaking her head. "We did it." The first steps were the hardest. Each movement demanded her full concentration, her mind forcing the frame to respond as if it were part of her body. The metal legs stumbled, sometimes locking awkwardly, but Thomas stayed at her side. He caught her when she nearly fell and steadied her when the balance wavered. "Again," he urged. "Do not stop now." So she tried again and again. The sound of the machine echoed across the small shelter. Clank, step, clank. Every successful step was a victory. Every stumble a reminder that she was not broken anymore but learning to rise. Hours passed before she collapsed back into her seat, sweat on her brow, chest heaving. She laughed, a sound sharp and unfamiliar even to her own ears. "I walked," she said in disbelief. "I truly walked," Tomas nodded. "And tomorrow you will walk further." That night Alira did not sleep easily. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the feeling of standing again. Her thoughts swirled with memories of her youth in the royal halls, where she had once walked with grace and command. Now her steps were clumsy, her body guided by metal, yet she felt stronger than she had ever felt in those marble chambers. The following days were filled with training. Tomas built a small practice yard outside the shelter, clearing the stones and marking a path for her to follow. Alira walked it daily, her steps growing more certain. She stumbled less, her balance improved, and the sparks that once flickered grew fewer as Thomas made constant adjustments. During one session, she paused to catch her breath. "Your people," she said to Thomas. "They have no empires like mine, no fleets that stretch across stars. Yet you build what my healers could not." Why? Thomas wiped sweat from his brow. "Because humans are used to being fragile. We cannot depend on strength alone, so we learn to create. We solve problems others call hopeless. It is how we survive." Alira looked at him with thoughtful eyes. Perhaps survival is a greater power than conquest. Their bond deepened with each passing week. She began to share pieces of her own life, stories of the Koran palace, of her childhood under the watchful eyes of tutors and guards. She admitted how heavy the crown had felt even before it touched her head. Thomas listened quietly, never mocking, never dismissing. He respected her words as he respected her effort in training. One evening, while the stars shimmered above, Alira asked the question that had been in her heart since the beginning. "Why do you care so much for me? You owe me nothing." Thomas gazed at the sky for a long moment before answering. "Because no one should be left broken if there is still a chance to heal them. You are more than a title, more than a patient. You are someone who deserves to live fully again." Her throat tightened, but she turned her face away to hide the tears that threatened. She had been abandoned by her own people, yet this single human refused to let her fade. By the third month, Alira could walk short distances without Thomas's support. Her steps were awkward but proud, her frame glowing faintly under the sun. She walked the length of the practice yard, turned and walked back again, her chin lifted high. "You are stronger every day," Thomas said, his voice filled with quiet admiration. Alira stopped before him, breathing heavily. "No, I'm not stronger. I am different. And it is because of you." As she spoke, she realized the truth. The legs Thomas had built were not only metal and wires. They were symbols. They showed that even when her own people had given up, there was still a will that refused to surrender. That will was human, and it had become part of her. Yet not everything was triumph. There were nights when the connections burned painfully, when the frame failed and sent her crashing to the ground. On those nights she cursed herself, cursed the machine, and even cursed Thomas, but each time he lifted her back up, reminding her that failure was only part of learning. One stormy evening, as the winds howled outside, Alira sat near the fire inside the shelter. Thomas was repairing one of the joints that had bent during training. She watched him silently for a long time before speaking. "When I was left on this world, I thought my story had ended," she said quietly. "But now I feel as if it has only begun." Thomas glanced up at her with a faint smile. "Then let us make sure the next chapter is worth telling." The storm raged through the night, but inside the shelter, warmth filled the air. A bond stronger than duty and deeper than chance had been forged between a human medic and a fallen princess. And as Alira drifted into sleep, she dreamed not of the palace she had lost, but of the path she was learning to walk step by step toward a new future. The horizon of the frontier world glowed faintly with the first light of dawn. Alira's legs, the frame that Thomas had built, moved steadily over the rough terrain of the practice yard. Each step was stronger than the last, more confident, more certain. She had learned to trust the metal limbs as if they were her own body. Thomas observed her from a distance, adjusting small parts and noting the alignment of the joints. He had spent months perfecting the system, refining the neural links and teaching Alira to balance her weight. Now she moved as if she had always been meant to walk. There was power in her steps, a quiet determination that had begun to ripple outward. Then came the alarm. A low rumble shook the ground beneath them. At first it was faint, almost unnoticeable, but it grew quickly into the unmistakable roar of engines. Alira paused, her heart hammering. Thomas straightened, scanning the horizon. Dark ships appeared above the red plains, their silhouettes menacing against the rising sun. The enemy had found them. Alira's thoughts raced. The same species that had attacked her ship months ago was back. She had thought she was safe, thought that the remote outpost was far enough from the reaches of war. Now she realized the danger she faced. Thomas stepped beside her, calm but alert. "We need to move," he said. "They will not give warning." Alira gritted her teeth. "I cannot run." "I will fight." Thomas's eyes widened slightly. "You are strong, but this is not a place to fight alone." "I am not alone," Alira said firmly. "You are with me, and together we will face them." The enemy forces landed with precision, dropping sleek combat units and soldiers trained for ruthless efficiency. The guards of the outpost, few in number, froze in fear. Some fled. Others hid behind walls and crates. Alira stood upright, her metal legs humming faintly with the energy of the connection Thomas had built. She drew a weapon, something she had never imagined she would hold again. Her hands were steady. Her eyes burned with determination. The enemy advanced, confident that the princess would fall again. They had seen her as broken, unable to move, and believed the humans of this small colony could not change that. They were wrong. Thomas worked quickly, directing the few remaining defenders and adjusting Alira's frame for combat. "Use your legs to move, not to fall," he said. "You are faster than they expect." "Keep them off balance," Alira nodded. The first clash was chaotic. Soldiers darted from cover to cover, firing energy rifles, their movements calculated and precise. Alira stepped forward, her legs moving with surprising speed. The mechanical frame responded perfectly, allowing her to pivot and dodge attacks. Sparks flew from the joints as they absorbed the shocks of impact. She swung her weapon, striking an enemy combat unit with force. The impact sent the soldier tumbling backward, stunned. Her confidence grew with every movement. She was not the helpless princess left behind. She was a force reborn. Thomas moved beside her, providing medical support and guiding her where to step. Together they formed a rhythm, a synchronized force that the enemy could not anticipate. Soldiers who expected an easy victory were now retreating under the combined skill of human and princess. One enemy commander, recognizing the threat, advanced personally, wielding a blade made from alien alloys. He attacked with precision, aiming for Alira's frame, seeking to disable it. She met him with agility, dodging and striking in a series of rapid movements. The mechanical legs absorbed the shocks, and she countered with a strike that knocked him to the ground. The defenders of the outpost, inspired by her courage, began to fight with renewed strength. Thomas coordinated their movements, pointing out weak points and covering Alira when the enemy numbers surged. Each victory built momentum. The outpost, once a place of despair, became a battlefield where hope had a presence. Alira's breathing was steady despite the exertion. She realized that her legs were not just tools of survival, they were extensions of her will. Where her own people had seen weakness, she now embodied resilience. Every step she took was a statement. She would not be discarded. She would not be abandoned. Hours passed and the tide of battle shifted. The enemy, confident at first, began to falter under the relentless determination of a princess reborn and a human who refused to let her fall. Alira moved among the battlefield with precision, her metal legs allowing her to cover ground quickly, striking and evading with a skill she had never known she possessed. Thomas stayed close, guiding her, repairing minor damage to the frame as they fought. His presence was calm amidst chaos, a reminder that she was not alone. Together, they formed a partnership stronger than any weapon or fleet. By midday, the enemy forces began to retreat. Their attacks became disorganized, their strategy faltering in the face of unexpected resilience. Alira pressed forward, driving them back with skill and determination. The soldiers who had once mocked her disability now witnessed her strength. They realized that survival and courage could defy expectations, even those of the greatest empires. When the last of the enemy ships lifted off and disappeared into the sky, the battlefield fell silent. The red plains were scarred by combat, but the survivors stood tall. Alira lowered her weapon, her legs trembling slightly from exertion but still strong. She looked around at the few defenders who remained, seeing hope in their eyes. Thomas approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "You did it," he said quietly. "You stood when no one thought you could." Alira's chest rose and fell as she tried to find words. "We did it," she corrected. "Not just me. You, the outpost, all of us together." For the first time since her fall, she felt a deep sense of pride. Not pride in a throne or a title, but pride in strength earned through struggle. She had been left to die, discarded by her own guards, and yet she had risen. And she had done so with the help of a human who refused to surrender. The outpost commander, who had been skeptical at first, stepped forward. "Princess Alira," he said, bowing slightly, "your courage has inspired us all. Your people will hear of this, and they will see that life and strength can be renewed in ways they never imagined." Alira nodded, her gaze drifting toward the horizon where the enemy had retreated. "Let them see," she said softly. "But know this. Strength is not in numbers or weapons alone. It is in the will to stand, to move forward, and to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Thomas watched her with quiet admiration. He knew that this battle was only the beginning of something larger. The enemy might return, but Alira had learned a truth stronger than fear. Even when broken, she could rise. And humanity had shown her that strength came not only from flesh and blood, but from courage, ingenuity, and the refusal to give up. As the sun set over the battlefield, casting long shadows across the red plains, Alira stood tall. Her legs, once lifeless, carried her with power and determination. She looked at Thomas, and they shared a silent understanding. Together, they had turned despair into hope, weakness into strength. And as the stars began to twinkle in the twilight sky, Alira realized that the path she was walking was no longer one of mere survival. It was the path of a warrior reborn, a princess who had been left to die but would now rise to lead, inspire, and endure. The frontier world, once a place of isolation and fear, had become a proving ground. Alira had taken the first steps into a new destiny, and with each step she reclaimed not only her body but her life, her purpose, and her strength. The days after the battle were quiet, but they were far from idle. Alira walked across the red plains of the frontier world, her mechanical legs moving with precision and strength. She trained daily, each step more confident than the last. The frame that Thomas had built no longer felt like a machine. It had become a part of her, an extension of her will. Thomas worked alongside her, repairing minor damages, adjusting the joints, and ensuring the neural connections remained strong. They moved together like a single unit, silent communication passing between them with gestures and shared glances. Alira had learned to trust not only her legs but also the human who had saved her. The Corin fleet arrived a week later. Ships of silver and blue filled the skies, their engines glowing against the backdrop of the red horizon. Alira's heart pounded as she watched familiar banners approach. She had been missing, believed dead by her people, and now they came to reclaim her. The first to step onto the ground was a senior Corin commander, a tall figure in ceremonial armor. He halted when he saw her, his eyes widening in surprise. The princess they had thought broken stood tall, her legs strong, her posture proud. "Princess Alira," he said, his voice uncertain. You survived. We thought you were lost." Alira looked at him calmly, her eyes steady. "I survived," she said simply. "Not because I was left behind, but because someone refused to let me die." The commander glanced at Thomas, who stood nearby with his hands folded in quiet humility. Alira stepped forward, demonstrating her balance and strength. Her mechanical legs responded flawlessly, the subtle hum of their energy a testament to human ingenuity. "These are my legs," she said, lifting her gaze to meet Thomas's. "Built by a human who saw what others could not. Built by someone who believed in me when even my own guards did not." The commander's eyes narrowed slightly, pride and disbelief warring on his face. "A human built this for you?" "Yes," Alira replied, "and not just built my legs. He gave me hope, courage, and the will to rise again. I am alive because of him." Word spread quickly among the Corran fleet. Soldiers who had once seen humans as weak and fragile now looked with new respect. A single human had done what an empire of thousands could not. He had restored life and strength to a princess left to die. The senior commander approached Thomas. "We owe you our gratitude," he said. "This act, it is beyond what we expected." "You have our respect." Thomas shook his head. "I need no titles or rewards. I only did what any healer would do. My reward is seeing her alive and walking." Alira smiled faintly. She stepped closer to him, her metal legs moving steadily. "And that is enough," she said. "Enough for both of us." The fleet commander studied her for a moment before bowing. "Then we will honor your strength, Princess. Your survival is a lesson to all of us. Humans are not to be underestimated. They are capable of courage and skill far beyond what we imagined." Alira turned her gaze to the horizon. She thought of the battles she had endured, of the enemy who had sought her destruction, and of the guards who had abandoned her. None of that mattered now. She had been broken and rebuilt, not by fate but by will. She had learned that strength came not only from armies or weapons but from courage, resilience, and those who refused to give up. The days that followed were filled with recognition and reconciliation. Alira walked among her people, demonstrating the power of human ingenuity and the resilience of the spirit. She spoke to the Corran leaders, sharing stories of Thomas's work, and teaching them that survival and hope were as important as conquest and command. She spent hours with Thomas, refining the movements of her legs, training to improve speed and agility. Each day she grew stronger, faster, more confident. The outpost became a center of innovation, where humans and Corran worked together to repair, improve, and create new technology. One evening, as the sun set and cast golden light across the plains, Alira and Thomas walked side by side. The sound of her mechanical legs was steady and strong, a rhythm that mirrored the beating of her heart. "You changed my life," Alira said quietly, "not only by giving me back my legs, but by showing me that strength is not only in the body, but in the will to rise again." Thomas shook his head. "No, you changed your life yourself. I only guided the path." Alira stopped and looked at him. "You guided more than the path. You guided my hope. You gave me back my life when it was lost." He smiled faintly. "Then it is as it should be. Everyone deserves a chance to rise, even when it seems impossible." The princess and the human walked to the edge of the outpost, where the stars began to appear against the darkening sky. Alira looked up at the constellations, remembering the nights she had spent thinking she would never walk again. Now she saw the stars with a sense of freedom she had not known before. "You know," she said, "my people will tell stories of this day. They will speak of the princess who stood again, of the human who built her legs, and of the strength that comes from hope and courage." "They will," Thomas agreed, "and those stories will carry farther than any fleet, farther than any empire. They will teach others that even in the darkest times life can rise again." Alira nodded. She knew the truth of his words. Her life had been saved, not by magic or destiny, but by the determination of a single human. That lesson was more valuable than any throne or empire. In the weeks that followed, Alira began to travel among the Corran fleets, demonstrating the lessons she had learned. Humans became respected advisors and engineers, valued for their ingenuity, courage, and resilience. Stories of their abilities spread across star systems, inspiring hope and cooperation. Alira never forgot Thomas. She refused to grant him titles or lands, knowing he would not desire them. Yet she made sure he was honored in the way that mattered most, through respect, recognition, and the knowledge that his work had changed the course of her life. One day, standing on a high plateau overlooking the Red Plains, Alira looked at the horizon with her mechanical legs steady beneath her. She breathed in the air of the world that had been both prison and proving ground. She thought of the battles, the pain, and the moments of despair that had once threatened to destroy her spirit, and she smiled, knowing she had risen above it all. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter that night. They reflected the promise of a future built on courage, willpower, and the quiet, steadfast strength of a human who had refused to leave a princess behind. Elira turned to Thomas. "The galaxy will remember this," she said. "It will remember what humans can do, and it will remember that life can always rise again, even when hope seems lost." Thomas looked at her, quiet and humble. "And it will remember you, princess, not as someone who was broken, but as someone who learned to rise. That is the true legacy." Together they watched the stars, knowing that their story had only just begun. The princess who had been left to die now walked tall, her legs strong, her spirit unbroken. The human who had saved her had shown that courage and willpower could change destinies, and across the galaxies the story spread, a story of hope, of strength, and of the enduring power of humanity.